A very good morning. Today is August 3rd, 2020. In this video, we'll be having a discussion of the editorial page analysis of the Hindu newspaper. There are some articles to be focused. The first article is regarding the Indian economy recovery and rebuilding and reviving. This article was penned by Manmohan Singh, the former Prime Minister of India, and also some of the economic analysts. And the second article is regarding the significance of Char Dham board verdict. Third article is on again the economic recovery, science of economic recovery. Fourth article focus upon the right intention policy, that is regarding national education policy. The final article is on parents, the first and national tutors. I welcome you all to Wi-Fi Study Karo. I am Prashant. The first article is regarding rebuilding the India's confidence, revive the economy. The path to a sustained recovery is to improve sentiments in a society and using economic tool. This article was penned by Manmohan Singh and the economic analyst from the Congress party. There are extraordinarily difficult times for our nation and the world. People are gripped with the fear of disease and death from COVID-19. The fear is ubiquitous and transcends geography, religion, and class. So the inability of the nations to control the spread of novel coronavirus and the lack of confirmed cure of the disease have exacerbated people's concern. Such a heightened sense of anxiety among people can cause tremendous upheavals in the functioning of societies. Consequently, disruption of the normal social order will inevitably impact the livelihoods of the large economy. The economic impact of the COVID-19 has been much discussed. There is unanimity among the economists that the global economy will experience one of its worst years in the history. So India is no exception and cannot buck the trend. While the estimates vary, it is clear that for the first time in many decades, India's economy will contract significantly. So the event and deep impact is that economic contraction is not merely a GDP number for the economists to analyze and debate. It means a reversal of many years of progress. A significant number among the weaker sections of our society may slip back into poverty, a rare occurrence for developing nations. Many enterprises may shut down. Entire generation may lost due to the severe unemployment. A contracting economy can adversely impact our ability to feed and educate our children owing to a shortage of financial resources. So the deleterious impact of an economic contraction is long and deep, especially on the poor. It is thus imperative to act with utmost urgency to nurse the economic back to good health. So the slowdown in economic activity is both a function of external factors such as lockdown and a behavioral change of the people and enterprises driven by fear. The foundation of reviving our economy is to inject confidence back into the entire ecosystem. People must feel confident about their livelihoods and lives. Entrepreneurs must feel confident about reopening and making investments. Bankers must feel confident about providing capital. Multilateral organizations must feel confident about to provide enough funding to India. Sovereign ratings agencies must feel confident about India's ability to fulfill its financial obligations and restore economic growth. So on NREGA and cash support, this is regarding the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act program, which provides a minimum wages. Around 62 million people demanded the work under MGNREGA programs at a minimum wages. So this is thrice than the usual number and 10 times more than the total number of employed by the entire listed corporate sector. So it is evident that most of them are displaced non-agricultural workers struggling to make ends meet. Such is the scale and enormity of despair in our labor forces. Fortuitously, the MGNREGA program has proved to be a bedrock to support in such times, but it is not enough. A meaningful cash transfer can restore confidence in these families. Money in hands of the people can provide an immediate sense of security and confidence, which is a cornerstone to restoring economic normalcy. So India is perhaps the only large democracy that had not provided direct cash assistance of a significant amount during the COVID-19 crisis. There seems to be a misplaced sense of apprehension that providing large cash assistance may deter people from returning to workforce were needed to starve industry of labor. Such fears are stale and unfounded. So in United States, as per the reports, nearly 3/4 of employed workers receive higher pay and benefits under the government's COVID-19 assistance than from the employees. So, but this has not prevented American industry from reopening. While it is inordinately late, it is still prudent to provide a significant sum as a direct cash assistance to the poor, which can inject confidence in them to weather this COVID-19 storm. So look at the financial system. There is also a dire need to restore the confidence in the financial system, which acts as a vital lubricant for the economy. So COVID-19 assistance measures undertaken by RBI and the government, such as interest rate reduction, credit guarantee scheme, and liquidity enhancement schemes, are welcome steps, but they have largely failed since banks are not confident of lending. So reviving the health and banking sector is not merely a capital infusion or disinvestment of the public sector banks. Allowing institutions such as RBI, public sector banks, bankruptcy boards, securities and insurance regulators to function freely and professionally is a foundational step to restoring confidence in financial system. It is critical to allow processes such as insolvency process to function smoothly without intervention. If there is a confidence among the people to spend and among the bankers to lend, then the private sector will spontaneously derive the confidence to reopen and invest. So when the firms feel confident of availability of capital and consumers, they do not need much else to kickstart the production and investment. Corporate tax cuts such as the one announced last year are misguided luxuries that will neither boost private investment nor fiscally affordable. So knee-jerk reactions such as protection of the Indian industry through trade restrictions cannot catalyze economic activity immediately, but instead is a dangerous reversal of established industry policy that has generated enormous economic gains over the last 3 decades. A large direct cash assistance to the people, improving capital adequacy of the banks and providing credit guarantee schemes for the corporate require significant financial resources. The government finances are already stretched with a major shortfall of the revenue. New avenues for the tax revenues are not feasible in the short term. Higher borrowing by the government is inevitable. So India cannot afford to be too fiscally restrained in this distressing times. So government needs to borrow. India must make a full use of loan program of international institutions such as IMF, that is International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. For the long track record as an impeccable borrower with no default, time repayment and full transparency make us an ideal borrower for these institutions. However, these will not suffice. The government needs to borrow more. Some have opined that India should hark back to old ways of deficit monetization by the RBI, also known as printing money. This is understandable given the current unforeseen circumstances, but we must be cognizant of the unhealthy impulses that seemingly free money creates from the government. So deficit monetization imposes a high intangible and institutional cost, as we have experienced in the past. It is perhaps prudent to adopt deficit monetization as a last resort when all other options are exhausted. So India is confronted with the dangerous trinity of military, health, economic threats. Diverting people's attention from these threats through choreographed events and headlines will not make them disappear. India entered the COVID-19 crisis in a precarious position with a slowing growth, rising unemployment and choked financial systems. So this epidemic has manifestly made it more painful. Setting things right, it is important to enlarge one's diagnosis of the India's economic woes from mere GDP numbers to underlying sentiments of fear, uncertainty and insecurity prevalent of the people in firms, institutions. Restoring confidence in the people through direct cash assistance and other welfare programs can help them live their lives and spend. Restoring confidence among the bankers through autonomy of institutions and process will help them to lend. Restoring confidence among the businesses with a greater access to the capital with the help them to invest and create jobs. Again, the restoring confidence among the international organizations by re-establishing the credibility of our institutions will help get funding assistance and objective sovereign ratings without being lured into complacency or the illusionary recovery of the headline numbers. The path of India's sustained economic revival is through philosophical pursuits of improving confidence and sentiments of all in our society using the economic tools as a fiscal and monetary policies. This is regarding how to recover economy on the purview and the thoughts and implementations to be done, says the Manmohan Singh, former Prime Minister of India and also economic analyst. The next article is regarding the significance of Char Dham board verdict. It is a setback to Hindutva and a victory for the state regulation in the temples. In the major setback to Hindutva agreement in the state's control of the Hindu temples, the Uttarakhand High Court on July 21st upheld the constitutionality of the Uttarakhand Char Dham Devasthanam Management Board Act 2019 that was surprisingly enacted by BJP government through though Hindutva forces opposed to such kind of laws. All religious reforms are resisted. Thus, the Sabarimala judgment, which was from 2018, saw a huge public protest similar to those after Shash Bano judgment. From the bogey of minority appeasement, the nation had now moved to injustice against the Hindus. Hindus are under the threat in the new battle cry. The writer favors grants of autonomy of the Hindu temples in managing their religious affairs, as state control of the temples is neither constitutionally permissible nor desirable. But in the last 6 years, the central government had not taken any initiative to release temples from the clutches of the states. The Uttarakhand law allegedly takes control of the 4 of the most sacred places in the state, including Kedarnath, Badrinath, which had challenged by the MP and former Minister Subramanian Swamy. Such laws are in a place for the number of temples such as Jagannath Puri, Vaishnadevo, Srinath, and also Mahakal at Ujjain, Kashi Vishwanath, and Tirupati Balaji temple. Interestingly, even Manus Code provided the priests do not have an absolute right in the temple's management. Instead, the king, that is of state in ancient India, and a vital say of the temple management. Even the Kedarnath and Badrinath were under the state's management as prescribed by the Badrinath and Kedarnath Temples Act 1939. So the newly enacted law merely replaced this act, and the Chief Justice of the Uttarakhand High Court, Ramesh Ranganathan, led bench of 129-page order and not only cited 144 judgment but also examined all the issues connected with the violation of religious rights of Hindus of the temple management. Laws upheld by the judiciary. Though Hindutva forces the blame of the Congress party and secularism for the laws, these laws were upheld by the court. Thus, the Sri Jagannath Temple Act, which was upheld by the Supreme Court of India in some of the cases, which says that the Chief Justice Rangnath, he was retired on July 27th, accordingly held through offerings of money, fruits, flowers, and any other things are given to the deity. Religious practices ends with these offerings, and that collection of the distribution of these offerings for maintenance and upkeep of the temple are secular activities. So again, the court explicitly said that the legislature is not bound to demonstrate mismanagement of the temple while enacting such laws. So one of the major arguments of the Hindutva victimhood is that this kind of state control is absent for Muslim Waqf and Sikh Gurudwaras. But then, as the 27 Waqf laws have been enacted so far, again the CJI Chief Justice rightly observed that it is not necessary that the legislator should make a law uniformly applicable to all religious of charitable institutions and endowments. So this is regarding the which was a verdict regarding the, and also denomination sector, which says that the biggest setback for Hindutva group is the rejection of High Court of recognizing Sanatana Dharma as a Hindu denominational sector. In paragraph 83, the court also observed that the Hindu Dharma is said to be Sanatana, that is one which had eternal values, or one which is neither the time bound or nor space bound. Since all the Hindus by and large have faith of Sanatana Dharma, they cannot be equated in any religion denominations for the code of the common faith and spiritual organization which unites and adherents together, which is absent. This is regarding the judgment and likely to be stayed in the point of the Supreme Court, and 9 bench of the court is reviewing the Sabarimala verdict on the rights of denominational sectors. That is the verdict and how the things have went regarding Hindutva and Sanatana Dharma. The next article is also on the economic recovery. As the lockdown restrictions ease, the economy sees the first sign to recovery. The latest data on the output of the 8 core industries point out the tentative signs that the pandemic spurred economic contraction may have begun to the bottom out. Commerce Ministry provisional figures shows that while overall production at the infrastructure industry extended their year-on decline to the fourth straight month in June, shrinking 15%, the pace with which activity contracted slowed for the second consecutive month following April's precipitous 37% plunge. So the sector-wise performance also affirms that the gradual reopening since June appears to have helped and tease back some of the smothering of the demand of the economy. The lifting of the restrictions of the inter and intrastate movement of the persons and goods revived both vehicular movement and consequently demand for the auto fuels, with the personal mode of mobility preferred given to fear of infection. Petrol product consumption grew 11% month on month in June. Electricity output too fell to a slower 11% pace that the preceding month is around 14.8% slump, again signaling an uptick in the demand for some of the manufacturing clusters, including in the western and northern India. This is regarding how the economy had revived in different sectors because it all started on unlock phase. For one of the significant shortfall is the GST collection point to the difficulties of the central and state government are facing regarding the garnering circularly crucially needed revenue. This had already swelled for the fiscal deficit at the end of the first quarter, that is 83% to the full year's target. The next article is regarding the policy with many right intention. This is regarding national education policy. Yesterday I have also done a dedicated video on national education policy 2020. You can just see it from the eye icon, or at the end of this video you will have. So regarding the national education policy, had several innovation ideas and daring proposals, but also makes a few problematic assumptions. After 34 years of the national education policy was introduced in 1986, the NEP 2020 have been announced. It has been approved by the Union Cabinet, and a majority of them are path-breaking proposals submitted by the committee in 2019 draft education policy seem to have been approved. Those approvals saw extensive debates and discussions in the country and generated a lot of feedback. A very few important proposals that figured the draft have been ignored in the final policy. So there are a couple of major new proposals in 2020 policy which were not proposed in the draft and which have been marginally modified with the draft policy. So the bold move it is that it is a heartening is that there is a statement of the policy such as education is a public good and the public education system is the foundation of the vibrant democratic society. So these statements forcefully guide the formulations of the policy in all aspects. The recognition of the education as a public good has important implications for the public policy. So it also has an important implications for the state approach towards private education. In fact, benevolent private players and private philanthropists draw inspiration from the nature of education as a public good. It is public education that contributes to the building of nations, their growth socially, economically, politically, culturally, technologically, and also building the human society. There is a more number of statements in the policy that may be welcomed. So each student holistic development in both academic and non-academic spheres emphasizes extracurricular activities, emphasizes research, specs of substantial investment is a strong, vibrant public education. The major recommendations of the committee that have been approved include to 5+3+3+4 system in the school, that is early childhood care and education, universal education that includes the secondary level, adoption of schools complexes, breakfast in the school meal program introduced by the vocational education at the upper primary level. So there will be just a regulatory body and the entire sector of Higher Education Commission of India. The policy also places emphasis on the liberal arts, humanities and India's heritage and language, facilitates selective entry of the high quality foreign universities, aim to increase the public investment in the education of around 6% of GDP. So whatever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5 will be the home language or mother tongue. So the first proposal, which should apply to all the schools including the private schools, will reduce the elitism and a dualism in the schools to a great extent, though one might expect a bolder move like common school system, which would be greater equalizer. So there are some missing in the final policy. What are the proposals of the statement were emphatically made in the draft but are missing in the policy? Or one of the most important statement is that it is repeatedly made of a draft policy that all commercially originated private institutions will be closed in a missing in the final policy, though the 2020 policy promises closure of the substandard teacher education institutions. Now the policy simply states that the matter of commercialization of education has been dealt with the policy through multiple relevant fronts, including the light but tight regulatory approach that mandates full public self-disclosure of the finances. So secondly, the draft policy promised doubling public expenditure on education to 20% of the total government expenditure from 10%. The 2020 policy simply reaffirms the commitment to allocation of 6% of GDP. A few other recommendations of the committee did not find a place in the final policy. These include setting up of a National Education Commission at the national level, and similar to the one of state level, there is no mention of the state school education regulatory authorities in 2020 policy. At the state level, the Department of School Education is regarded as the apex body. This is regarding the education policy and also the norms. The next article is regarding the parents, the first and natural tutors. How a low income parents can start getting more involved into early childhood care and education. The NEP makes a clear case for the early childhood care and education, that is ECCE. Schools providing quality ECCE, that is National Education Policy of Early Childhood Care, the greatest dividends for the children who come from the families that are economically disadvantaged. Over 85% of the children's cumulative brain development occurs before the age of 6, yet over the 5 crore children are estimated to have not have attained foundational literacy at the numeracy in India. At present, says that the policy children from social economic disadvantaged background do not have an access to ECCE. The NEP, that is National Education Policy, lays out the detailed paradigm for the educators to provide high quality ECCE through preschools and Anganwadis. It also talks how parents can be active stakeholders of the children's education. Indeed, it's crucial that we dig deeper into how parents can help as a learning in schools can be reinforced or undone at home. Parents are their children's first and natural tutors. At the age involving them is necessary to ensure that the children learn the foundational skills they need to succeed in school. But how can the low-income parents, which constraints on the time and energy, start getting more involved in ECCE is again a question mark. So they are building aspirations. Instead, many opt to send the children to primary school too early when they are still cognitively and emotionally unprepared for the classroom studies. These are often children who left behind the primary school and beyond with a limited scope of recovery. Evidence suggests that the low-income parents do not value education primary school onwards, spending a disproportionate amount of their monthly income on it. However, awareness of the importance of the education and the preschool are missing. Indeed, while high income parents face a huge amount of social pressure to help their children achieve development milestones before the age of 6, low-income parents lack such social incentives. Building aspirations through the role model, mass media and social media, involving examples of celebrities and the influencers in the crucial first step. So providing information is that once awareness of the aspirations have been built, we must also provide a low-income parents with an educational tool to support their children that they can themselves confidently administer. So the preschool age children usually have an attention of the span of around 5 to 15 minutes. So all the parents are usually equipped to understand the foundational skills that their children are learning at that age. Especially 70% of mothers, even more fathers, are educated up to class 5 themselves. So we need to assist them in combining the vast wealth of the print and the online content. So measuring progress is that the last essential piece of the puzzle for the sustained engagement of the parents is to motivate them on a regular basis and give them measurable indications of the progress and changes. So behavioral research on nudges, social incentives, and the power of creating habits demonstrate some possible ways to provide continuous feed and encouragement. So measurement also acts as a powerful motivation mechanism. The child's progress and the growth can be measured through rigorous assessment and through the visual learning journeys. Sharing results with the parents and developing plans in a partnership with them can also ensure that truly no child is left behind. This is regarding the article discussion. Thank you for your time. If you are first to my channel, I request you all to subscribe so that you will not miss any updates. Have a great day.